Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday broadcast, starting a few minutes late. We're here, as usual, to answer questions about meditation practice and the Buddhist teaching, with special emphasis on practical application of the Buddhist teaching. So this isn't a session for theoretical questions, intellectual questions, curiosity questions. This is about your life and your practice and your journey. So you don't have to go looking for questions. If you don't have any questions, we'll just sit and be mindful for a bit together. Those of you who do have questions that are of pressing concern, please feel free to post them in the chat at any time. I'll be back, let's say, at 20 minutes after the hour to begin to answer them. So we'll start a little bit late. Of the first 20 minutes, you can take your time to formulate your questions and just spend the 15 minutes in silent meditation, walking or sitting, or walking and sitting. And I will be back at 20 minutes after to begin answering. All right, that's 15 minutes. So we're back. We begin with questions and answers. So from here on, we'll remove anything that's not a question in the chat just to keep it focused. So if you've asked your question, no need to sit and read the chat. Just close your eyes, stay mindful, and we'll get to your question according to priority. Again, the priority is questions that appear to be of immediate concern and importance in one's practice.
Hello. Thank you,
Yeah.
Bhante. We do have questions. I'm diagnosed with ADHD, and often I have trouble physically getting started with things. I know what I should do, but my body won't move. I try to note everything I feel, but it seems to mostly be bodily sensations, wanting, frustration, and I remain stuck for long periods. Is this correct practice? The best thing I can do?
Yes. So wanting and frustration are going to be a part of what's preventing you from getting started. But it sounds like you're talking about wanting to get started and frustration when you can't get started. So there's got to be something else there, like there can be worry, there can be fear, there can be doubt about whether you should do it. There can be the attachment, the liking of the laziness, the aversion towards getting started on things. And so make sure you're noting that as well. But yeah, as long as you're catching the whole spectrum of experiences, it's not designed to fix in a single step. The fix comes from letting go, which comes from seeing clearly, seeing that it's not worth clinging to, really getting tired of it. You get tired and lose your interest in just sitting around and so on. You lose the upset and the excitement. Like there can be, for some people, there can be aversion towards getting started. So you'll see that aversion is the real problem. It's just not a useful state. But also the wanting to get started, you have to note that. You really just have to do things when you have the understanding that they're important to do and right to do at this time. You don't need wanting to do them. That's not going to really help in the long term. But the best you can do is probably not that. The best you could do is to find a way to do an intensive course in mindfulness. Or even, we have this at-home course designed for people to get started, and do something like that as a means to sort of put a structure to your practice and gain some of the depth of skill that will help you better recognize what you're experiencing.
Sometimes my mind is disturbed by stories that keep on distracting me. What is the best way to work with that? Reflect on stories, or wanting, or anxious?
Well, stories is probably not the best. It's not terrible, but one thing I would question is the statement that the mind is disturbed by stories. Now, stories don't particularly disturb you. You're triggered by them. So the disturbed is something that arises in your mind as a result of the stories, and you have to note that disturbance. And what do you mean by disturbance? Are you interested in them? Are you averse to them? That sort of thing. What is your reaction? So make sure you're noting that. Wanting can be a part of that. Anxious can be a part of that. But again, you're not looking to stop that from happening. Eventually, over time, it will peter out if you practice diligently. But your goal and your focus should just be on seeing clearly. And by seeing clearly, you have less of an attachment, and so there's less of a disturbance. And you'll find that the stories don't get created. There's only moments of thought. Which is why the stories isn't the greatest note. Better to note thinking. Try and catch the actual individual moments of experience. Or if you see an image that you interpret as a story, try and note the image instead as seeing, because that's what's really happening.
I have schizophrenia, and sometimes I use my ego rising in my chest to feel better and overcome paranoia. I'm trying to stop doing this and heal myself the right way. Is it possible, or is my search just in vain?
So in mindfulness, we avoid the idea of trying to do something, or even the idea of healing per se. I mean, these are sort of good narratives to have in an abstract sense, but so when you use your ego arising in your chest, that's a conceptual idea of what's happening, and your desire to feel better. You're doing it in order to feel better. We try and avoid that in mindfulness. We try and rather gain a better perspective on what we do feel, so that it no longer appears to us as worse. Right? If you want to feel better, that's what you're saying, is that you feel worse, and you would do something to try and have an experience that you prefer. So that preference is what's going to set you up for suffering. And instead we try to focus on what we do feel. So you want to feel better. Why is that? What are you feeling that you consider to be worse, to be not better, right? The opposite of better, to be inferior, and try and change your perspective so you no longer see it that way. So you're able just to just experience what you experience. Like paranoia, it's not really something you have to overcome as a practice. You just have to come to terms with. You have to face it and gain a better perspective on even the paranoia, because it's not. I mean, paranoia is just a fancy way of talking about fear, and I'm not trying to trivialize it, but trying to reduce it to the building blocks of what's actually there. Which actually there is fear, and so we call it paranoia, and it's important. It's an important name because it means it's pretty extreme and it's unreasonable and that sort of thing. But that's not really useful for mindfulness. The fear is still just fear, and we're trying to, in some sense, trivialize it. We're trying to make it so that fear is just fear. It's not good, not bad, not too much, not paranoid, not unreasonable, that sort of thing. It's just fear. The experience is just the fear. So trying to stop doing it, that's not the practice. Try and see it clearly. Don't worry about it, because what that does for you is it makes you invincible to the experience. The experience no longer has power over you. It just is what it is. There's no meaning behind experiences, and I think that's a big problem with schizophrenics, is they ascribe meaning, as we all do, but the meaning that they ascribe causes paranoia and so on. So rather than ascribing meaning to the experience, try and just experience it. Fear, just say to yourself, afraid. Yeah, and you don't have to stop, right? You don't have to stop bad practices. Just try and note when you want to do them, when you're doing them. Try and note if you like them and that sort of thing. I mean, just note it. Just try and stay present and try and get a better perspective that is less reactionary. And I wish you all the best. I don't know if you've read our booklet on how to meditate. That might help give a little bit of guidance. And we also have the at-home course if you're interested.
How do we deal with darkness or murkiness? Do we simply note it while it's there, when it arises? Is there a protective practice against these, or a routine antidote, such as metta, for anger?
Well, why would you seek an antidote? Darkness is, you mean like seeing darkness? Then you just say seeing. Murkiness, I'm not sure what you're referring to. These are just sort of abstract ideas. You have to focus on what the actual experience is. There's confusion, well, that's confusion. If there's a sense of dullness of the mind, that's just a feeling. You can say dull. I'm not sure what you mean by murkiness, but if you see sort of a murky flickering or something like that, that's just vision. You would just say seeing. So, these are not unwholesome. There is a sense in a figurative way that we talk about delusion as being murkiness, and that is something that's problematic. And the antidote to to delusion is wisdom, is seeing clearly, which is what mindfulness is for. Mindfulness isn't really focused on anger or greed. It's actually more focused on delusion, which is the only reason why anger and greed can arise in the first place. But rather than trying to prevent anger, prevent greed, we're trying to see clearly, which includes seeing the suffering that comes from anger and greed and so on.
Since I started practicing Vipassana, I observe my behavior closely. When in social circles, I tend to subtly boast about myself, and I feel a superiority complex. However, as soon as I am alone, I regret everything that I said. How do I control my ego?
Well, that's kind of a funny question. You have to understand that control is a part of the ego. And the real answer to your question lies, I think, in this, that we maybe don't easily realize that ego is based on control. It's based on, well, not just control, but control is a big part of it. And if you give up control, then you also give up the identification and the feeling of superiority, the desire to be superior, and that sort of thing. And then the inferiority when you come back home and feel like you're a terrible person for doing that and that sort of thing. I mean, this is all identification, and control is bound up in that. Control only comes because you see it as under your control, as you, as yours. So trying to control the ego is really the wrong way of going about it. It's only going to augment your sense of self. Mindfulness isn't about control. It's about seeing. Well, the word Vipassana means seeing clearly. So that you're seeing this is important. Try and see it more and more clearly, more and more frequently. And over time, your mind will get tired of it and will turn away, and will get a better perspective on things, which will allow you to eventually just let go.
You have said before that the arising of the word rising or falling has to be after the fact of rising the stomach or falling the stomach, but I feel that both things happened simultaneously. Can you please help clarify this?
Well, I don't normally say that about rising and falling. I may have, but normally I would be cautious about that. The problem with that is that the physical happens continuously and lasts some time. But your noting has to happen after the experience in all cases. So with rising and falling, it's kind of unique in that you're noting both the beginning and the end. So when it starts to rise, as soon as you realize that, well, the next moment you start to say to yourself, rise, and then at the end, sing, something like that. So sing is when you realize it's ended. So it's not, you only have the opportunity to note after you experience something. It's more obvious with thinking, which only lasts a moment. When you say thinking, the thought is already gone. And if you're unmindful, it will persist. I mean, it will arise again, and it will distract you and so on. But the noting still has to be the next moment. So with the physical, it's a little bit less obvious because, again, the physical lasts multiple moments, and the rising occurs over many moments. But there are instances where you can actually see that. You see a moment of the rising, just a part of it, the beginning part, and then you see the middle part, and then you see the end part, and you're able to notice them and experience them as distinct, which is kind of a good sign that you have clarity and you're seeing. You have a sharpness of vision, sharpness of awareness. Yeah, you just note as soon as you notice it starts to rise, sing when you notice it ends. And it'll always be the next moment, of course. You can't predict it or be simultaneous because you have to be experiencing in that moment. But as soon as you've experienced, then you can say, of course, then it has to be, then you say, sing, rising, falling. That's how we do it.
Sometimes I can't pinpoint exactly what is happening, and my noting is imprecise. I use my intellect and thoughts to ponder it until I figure out the most precise term. Is this proper?
Well, you're probably overthinking it. it's really not that hard, or it shouldn't be that hard. If you can't pinpoint what is happening, you should probably note that, like doubting or unsure or confused, or if it's a feeling, you note feeling. You can also just note knowing you're aware that something's happening. But it can, in the beginning, be a little bit confusing and challenging, but you certainly don't, that's certainly not a sign that you're getting better at the practice. That's a sign that you still have to sort of get a little bit more real about it and a little more in tune. But that can be the challenge in the beginning, that you're not really in tune with reality enough to have a clear understanding of what's going on. That's the skill involved with mindfulness. So it just take time.
How important is the guru or teacher on the Buddhist path in accordance with the Theravada tradition?
Well, it's pretty important. Yeah, it's really, I mean, you hear the Buddha talk about good friendship as being the entirety of the holy life. And by good friendship, he really means association with a teacher. He doesn't mean having lots of friends who are also practicing. Friend is the one who teaches you. So yeah, that's considered to be quite important. Should be a respectful relationship. And you should put yourself into the protection of their teacher. So we have an opening ceremony that people can do if they like. It's optional, where they say Imahang Acharya Atabawang Tumhakang Parichachami. I give myself over to you, like you just like you give up yourself, like you transfer ownership of yourself to your teacher in a way. I mean, again, this is an optional thing, and it's not really as scary as it might sound. But it means it's a way of saying you're just going to dedicate yourself. If the teacher tells you to do something, well, if you can't do it, you know you're going to leave, but you won't not do it and stay. You'll do whatever the teacher says until you feel like you have to leave. There's no compulsion. There's not a promise to do. It's a promise to follow. And so it's a very respectful sort of relationship that's important. Teacher is in a position to see things that you are not so easily able to see, and to be a little more honest about them, and to make you honest, keep you honest. It often doesn't even matter whether the teacher is advanced or enlightened. They have a good understanding of the theory. It can often be enough, because it's much easier to see the defilements in others than it is to see in yourself. So it's not something to be too fussy about, but it certainly is a good thing to find people who will guide you and give you good advice. Basically doing meditation courses, that sort of thing. It seems to be a good format, where you do a meditation course and you have a teacher you meet with every day.
Mindfulness training. What are some of the signs that show that progress has been made?
Well, there is really only one metric, and that's the reduction of greed, anger, and delusion. I'm sorry to say it's pretty simple, maybe sounds a little bit overly simplistic, but that's about it. Do you have less greed? Do you have less anger? Do you have less delusion? Delusion being the key point. Greed and anger are not nearly as significant as delusion. So are you able to, do you have a greater clarity about how your mind works and why you get angry and why you are partial to things? You have a better clarity about seeing that the things that you're partial to are not worth being partial towards. Things you get upset about are not worth getting upset about, that sort of thing. And so you'll see, as a result, there's less greed and less anger, because of the clarity and the absence of delusion. That's maybe a little vague is the problem, but I mean, I can't just give examples. You'll have to see the examples in your life. If you don't see them, well, then it's a sign you're probably not yet seeing clearly enough to make a difference or to notice the difference. Try and work on seeing clearly. I mean, honestly, to really get a good, solid conviction even of the efficacy of the practice, it's best to try and do some formal practice, like a formal course. Just the at-home course, but even better to try and do an intensive course where you spend some time developing the foundations of the practice.
Do you have advice for certain OCD-type tendencies when noting, like making a note, then judging self for making an incorrect note, noting the judgment, feeling uncertain, and these loop cycles?
Yeah, I mean, the big problem, like OCD, ADHD, these things are kind of hiding something important, and that's the moments of experience that are triggering them. So it's kind of a bit mysterious, and it kind of glosses over the real issue when you say something like OCD or ADHD. You give it a label, and that seems beneficial because now you're reassured that it's an actual thing, but it's not actually a thing. The thing is these moments of triggers that occur. So all the things, none of the things you've mentioned, except maybe the judging, speak back to the actual problem of getting triggered. Like, why do you judge, and how do you feel when you judge, and so on. Try and note the worry, the fear, the disliking, the liking, the wanting, and so on. Hindrances are basically going to be the makeup of what causes problems. That being said, practically speaking, it is okay to just note things in a loop again and again, because that's the kind of thing that's going to make you tired of them. You're going to lose your excitement that causes you to spiral out of control. Just try and see it again and again, and learn patience to just experience things on repeat. It really is an important part of the practice to start to see that they are on repeat, and senselessly on repeat. That's like the core. It's a core insight in mindfulness practice, is to see that reality and experiences are senselessly on repeat. So don't shy away from that. Don't think, oh, this is getting nowhere. That's the point. It's getting nowhere. To see that it's getting nowhere. To see that it's getting nowhere and let go let go of it. Let go of trying to get somewhere. Let go of this meaningless chasing your tail. The only way it happens is by seeing it. So that you're starting to see it as a loop, as a cycle, is actually a sign, of a good sign. It's just something that you have to, rather than shy away from or try to fix, you have to come to terms with and face and be patient towards. Let it come. If you see that enough, that cycle, that continuous, incessant, senseless, pointless cycling, your mind will, over time, if you say do it without reacting, and if you have mindfulness towards it, over time your mind will just let go. We'll get tired. Atanibindati duke. You become disenchanted with the suffering, bored of the suffering, tired of the suffering, tired of something that is clearly causing you to suffer.
In our everyday life after meditation, should we continue focusing on the sensations of the breath, or should we focus more on the sensation of the body, such as hand, feet, tongue, face?
Well, hand, feet, tongue, face are not sensations. In everyday life, we recommend to focus on postures of the body, like walking, standing, sitting, lying. They're just good sort of conventional names for the experience of the experience of the body. So sitting is an experience of what it feels like to sit. Standing, what it feels like to stand. Walking is an experience of the foot moving, like walking. Lying down, same thing. Just try and note those four as a sort of base, and then any movements you can note. It's the movements that you would want to note apart from that. You can also note the senses in daily life: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking, of course.
My understanding is that a Buddha, at least in some circumstances, can predict whether and when someone becomes a Buddha or Arahant. Can this foresight apply universally, or are there limits?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, not really a practical question, so I'm disinclined to speculate on that.
I am seeking advice for dealing with lust in the long term. Sexual desire is built into us, and I see it as defilement, but many times it feels like torture. Is it more conducive to follow the Buddha and get it out of my system until the age of 29? Don't we need more experience to know it's delusion?
Yeah, the Buddha didn't choose, and he wasn't the Buddha then, but he didn't decide to get it out of his system. He just didn't know any better until he was 29. And many people who followed after the Buddha were lucky to get out of the lay life earlier. So there were children as young as 7, but much more common around 20. So the Buddha said at 20, that's a good time. And that's when you can become a monk. Of course, you can become a novice earlier, and there were many people who did that. But if you're in the situation where you see the stress and the suffering, the torture involved with it, then really it's important to understand how close to impossible it is to do living in the lay life. It's if you have that sort of sexual desire, it's not just going to go away by living your life, by trying to distract yourself with other things. You really need a supportive environment. Like the only really good practical way of doing that is to become a monk. So that's probably the best advice I could give you. Otherwise, just appreciate that it's not really at the top of your list. I mean, even a sotapanna can still have children and sexual intercourse and romantic partners. That's a sotapanna, someone who has already seen nibbana. So that should really be kind of the first priority. Don't worry so much about lust and sexual desire. Worry more about, say, the 5 precepts: killing, stealing, cheating, lying, drugs, and alcohol. And if you can keep them, well, then you can have times where you keep the 8 precepts, maybe once a week on Sundays or Saturdays or something. And then you can try to do an intensive meditation course where you keep the 8 precepts for an extended period of time. And you work on that. Eventually you get to the point where you feel comfortable ordaining and going the next step. And then you have if you're in the right environment as a monk, you can find it much easier to prevent those experiences, free yourself from those experiences, and also prevent them. Like there's less opportunities, so it's easier to deal with, much easier to be mindful. There's not the opportunities to indulge and so on.
Could you explain sampajanna, vitakka, and vicara from a practical perspective during meditation?
Vitakka and vicara are only used as meditation terms when talking about the jhanas. So, I mean, in satipatthana practice, it gets a little bit complicated, I guess, because there is a sense that vitakka and vicara can go away at times, but it's nothing like what you might experience in samatha practice. So they're used mostly to talk about samatha, jhanas, trance states where the mind is just fixed and focused on a single object with no distracting thoughts, basically. Now, in mindfulness practice, as you read in the Satipatthana Sutta, it's a little bit different. There's a sense that you are paying attention to the distractions and just facing them and being a little more flexible, less fixed and focused on a conceptual object, more focused on reality. Sampajanna is really just another word for wisdom, technically, but it seems to have been used to talk about a clarity of mind focused on experience. So it's sort of a product of being mindful. When you're mindful, you recognize and you fix the mind on an object in the proper way, meaning seeing is just seeing. So you have a sense of it as just seeing. Then there's the sampajanna, which is just basically a description of what it's like to be mindful. They're generally paired, sati sampajanna. And you see in the Satipatthana Sutta, they're also put together, atapi sampajano satima. They're used together. Sampajanna is usually used in that way, and so it's kind of used to describe what it's like to be mindful. You're sampaja. Janya is from nya, the root, meaning to know. Pa means fully, or in a special sense, or in a heightened sense, knowing clearly, maybe. And sam means composed, in a sense. I mean, it's just these prefixes just apply the meaning. They hint at the meaning of kind of a clear knowledge of things as they are, which is technically considered to be wisdom, but it's used as a word to describe something a little more abstract, maybe, or a little more practical than simply the idea of wisdom. But that's what it is. Wisdom is not a thinking thing. Wisdom is a perspective, more like a perspective.
What is the main text to follow for a Theravada Buddhist?
Well, I'd like to say the Satipatthana Sutta, honestly. I know it's not comprehensive, but I mean, I guess that's the point, is there's no one comprehensive text. There's lots of talks. If we had one text, it would be the Visuddhimagga, which is kind of a explanation of the Buddha's teachings, a very ancient sort of commentary, or a sort of gathering together of all the commentaries and putting them into a sensical, meaningful framework, putting them in the framework of the seven, what we call the seven Visuddhis, seven purifications. And then it details in order from 1 to 7, is kind of a description of the Buddhist path in Theravada Buddhism.
Sometimes noting feels like an obstacle to entering samadhi, the 8th factor. Can you explain how noting and samadhi can coexist?
You don't enter samadhi. Samadhi isn't a room or a place that you enter. You can enter into jhana, which is a kind of samadhi, but it's a way of talking about samadhi. But samadhi is just a quality of mind. It's not a thing that you enter. The thing about noting is that it puts you in touch with reality, and noting isn't the obstacle. The obstacle is reality, because reality is impermanent, unsatisfying, uncontrollable. The only way to enter into appana samadhi, which is a jhana state, is to put aside your experience of reality, to kind of not experience reality, in a sense, to only focus on a single object like a light or a color. And that's not, or you say 8th factor, you're obviously talking about the Eightfold Noble Path. And so the other option is to become enlightened through the practice of mindfulness, and then there will be the non-distraction. So absolutely, mindfulness is not an obstacle. Mindfulness is the catalyst, but it is quite likely that you have the idea of going into a trance state of experience, and that's not what the Eightfold Noble Path is. The Eightfold Noble Path is cessation. So there's no, now I'm in the jhanas or something like that. There's the cessation, which comes from letting go. And it has samadhi, because it isn't distracted. It doesn't have samadhi because you feel focused or you feel calm or you feel fixed on a single object. It's not like that. There is no feeling whatsoever. There is no conscious arising of experience. There's the cessation. That's the Eightfold Noble Path. And to get there, you need to see the three characteristics. You need to focus on things that are chaotic, unpredictable. Why? Because those are the things that you cling to, and it's only by seeing them as chaotic, unpredictable, unsatisfying, uncontrollable that you'll ever let go. And letting go is the only way there will be cessation. It's cause and effect. Cessation is the only way there'll be the eighth factor of the Noble Path. So don't misunderstand that somehow ordinary focus or concentration is one of the factors of the path. It's not. The eight factors arise together in one moment. And that moment is the cessation of suffering.
Can non-vegetarian food affect our meditation in any way?
Not meaningfully, no. I mean, the only way it might is that two ways I can think of. One is that it makes you tired and lazy, and two, it affects your health. So if you're eating red meat, it's apparently carcinogenic, and getting cancer can certainly affect your meditation. But those are very oblique, sort of roundabout ways of affecting. There's no direct effect from eating meat.
What are the ways to meditate during a state of strong addiction? I tried to do mantra meditation that you taught, and noted lust and body, but these unwholesome states are overpowering.
Yeah, I mean, just like the other person, you really need a supportive environment. This is the problem. I mean, learning that it's such a problem and that it overpowers you is valuable in the short term, or no, in the long term. It's just something that you have to get a deeper and more profound appreciation of over time. I mean, this is a useful realization that it's not a switch you can turn off. Mindfulness isn't a magic pill that's just going to work and suddenly you don't have these problems anymore. This is eventually, potentially, or likely for most people, a many lifetime solution. Like, it's going to take multiple lifetimes to come to terms with, if you ever do come to terms with it. So, buckle down, and if you want quicker results, you really need to do more intensive practice, find a supportive environment, and really dedicate yourself to cultivating the skill of mindfulness, because it's a skill. And it's a skill that's contrary to the habit of lust and desire. So they're not going to work together. They're not going to be able to cultivate them together.
Critics of the Mahasi method say it's limited and can only take you to Sotapanna. Due to latency of noting experiencing, it must be abandoned after clear mindfulness is established. Can you refute this?
Well, show me some evidence or some theory as to. I mean, I don't have to refute it. You're making the claim that because of this is not possible. I don't see any real logic behind the argument. I mean, you haven't given any real anything to really refute. So you bring up the word latency as if that were a thing. I mean, any application you do to an experience is always going to be the next moment. So latency isn't really an issue. The noting itself is a thought process. It's an abstract sort of construct, or not abstract, but it's intellectual, or I don't know. Like, it requires mental activity to find the word and so on. But that activity cultivates mindfulness. It's called tirasanya. I mean, let's put it this way. I'm not going to answer in the way that so the way that I just did is going down the idea of describing why it works. But here's the thing: if something leads you to sotapanna, there is no way it can't lead to arahantship. I mean, that's kind of absurd. Anyone who says that, I think they're just they have agati. They have kind of a bias against the practice. So they're trying to find an argument. It's kind of ridiculous. How could anything that leads you to sotapanna not lead you to sakadagami, anagami, and arahant? That's, I think, the best answer, not to go into the details of latency and so on. Like if there's a problem with latency, how could it lead to be a sotapanna? The object of sotapanna is the same as the object of arahantship. It's just greater clarity, greater appreciation. But it's the same experience. It's the cessation of suffering. Nibbana isn't different. There's not some different practice that you should do for the second, the third, and the fourth path.
Bhante, we've crossed the hour, and you've answered all the questions in the top tier. Shall we call it for the day?
Thank you all for the questions. Thank you, Chris and Jim and whoever else was helping today. A lot of questions, that's great. Thank you all for being so thoughtful and interested in the Buddhist teaching and the practice of mindfulness. I wish you all the best in your practice. Those of you who are suffering, may you be free from suffering. Those of you who are free from suffering, may you share and spread the teaching far and wide. Have a good week, everyone. Sadhu.
Sadhu.